Can a torn stuffed rabbit be the only thing holding a puppy together? When I found him behind a supermarket in Nashville, he ignored my food, ignored my voice, and clenched that toy in his tiny teeth like it was the last piece of his old life. And I had no idea he'd use it to choose his new family. My name is Victor. I'm 46, and I've been volunteering with rescue dogs long enough to think I'd seen just about everything. But that afternoon, the heat was bouncing off the cracked asphalt. The dumpsters were humming with flies, and in the middle of all that junk sat this tiny Labrador puppy, maybe 6 weeks old, the color of pale cream. He had that Dudley look people talk about. Soft pink nose, light rims around his eyes instead of black, like somebody had erased the outline of his face and left him a little unfinished. He wasn't looking at me. He wasn't even looking at the world. He was staring straight ahead, while his whole little body curved around a gray stuffed rabbit that was almost as big as he was. One ear was hanging by a thread, the fabric was rubbed thin on the belly, and there was a small patch where someone had tried to fix it once and given up. I set a shallow bowl of food a few feet away and backed off. Normally a puppy that age will wobble straight to the smell, no questions asked. This one just tightened his jaw, pressing yellow baby teeth deeper into worn plush, and turned his head so he could keep the rabbit between us. Standing there in the trash and heat, I realized something simple and a little scary. If I reached for that toy, he might flinch, he might shake, but he was not going to let it go. And for the first time that day, it hit me that the rabbit wasn't just a toy. It was the lock on the only door his tiny world still had. I'm a shelter volunteer, so usually my job is pretty simple. You show up, you slip a leash on a scared dog, you get them into the truck and out of danger before they even know what happened. Fast, clean, by the book. But this little Labrador puppy, the longer I looked at him, the more I understood that none of my usual tricks were going to work. He wasn't just scared, he was wrapped around that rabbit like his whole mind was hiding inside it. So instead of walking straight in with a leash, I sat down on the dirty concrete a few yards away and just watched him breathe. One of the supermarket workers came out to smoke and noticed where I was looking. He said the pup had been there for a while now, always with that same toy in his mouth. No collar, no one asking about him, no car hanging around. Just a tiny body and a stuffed rabbit getting a little grayer every day. From where I sat, I could see a faded stitch on the rabbit's ear, like somebody had tried to fix it once, maybe a kid with clumsy fingers and too big thread. There was even a scrap of old tag washed nearly blank. It hit me harder than I expected. Another thrown-away puppy. And somehow it still hurt like the first time. I pushed the food bowl a little closer, slow and quiet. Then I tore off a small piece and tossed it halfway between us. He shuffled forward on those wobbly legs, never loosening his grip, the rabbit dragging in the dust. Every time a truck door slammed or a cart rattled over the pavement, he flinched and pulled the toy tighter against his chest. He was hungry, and he was curious, but he was prepared to starve before he was ready to let that rabbit go. At some point, I stopped thinking about rescuing him and started thinking about earning the right to sit next to that rabbit. If the only thing holding a tiny Labrador puppy together was a torn piece of fabric, then I needed to prove I wasn't here to take it away. So I shuffled closer, slow enough that even the flies seemed faster than me. I bent my knees and lowered myself until I was more or less on his level. Then I turned my eyes slightly to the side, looking past him at the dumpster instead of straight at his face. Dogs notice where you point your eyes. He needed to see that I wasn't hunting him or his toy. He watched me over one chewed ear. Then he took a little step forward, rabbit still clamped in his mouth, and angled his body so the toy stayed between us like a tiny gray shield. Every time I exhaled, he gave that rabbit a tiny squeeze, like he was reminding himself where the edge of safety was. I slowly reached out, not toward the toy, but toward the cracked ground just in front of his paws. 2 fingers, palm open, resting on the warm concrete. He didn't bolt. He didn't growl. He only flicked his eyes from my hand to the rabbit's stitched-on smile, as if checking which of us was telling the truth. People walked past the back lot while we sat there, some glancing over, some laughing softly at the sight of a grown man talking to a puppy with a stuffed bunny. Every chuckle, Every pointed finger made his little body fold tighter around the toy. His neck curled, his shoulders hunched, and the rabbit ended up almost under his chin, like he was trying to disappear behind it. Watching him do that did something to me. I realized this wasn't just a scared puppy. This was a baby who had decided that the world could laugh at him, but it wasn't touching the one thing he trusted. If I broke that rule, I'd lose him before I ever got him into the truck. After a while, my legs went numb and the sun slid a little lower on the wall. I knew I couldn't stay on that concrete forever. I reached back and felt for the leash hooked to my belt, fingers closing around it. And even as I did, I had to admit to myself that I still had no idea how to take this puppy away from that lot without tearing apart the tiny world he'd built around a stuffed rabbit. There's a point in every rescue where you have to stop thinking and start moving. For me, that moment came when I realized the only rule I couldn't break was simple: don't touch the rabbit. I walked back to my pickup and pulled out the small crate we use for tiny ones like him, brought it behind the supermarket, set it on the ground a few feet away, and swung the door open so it stayed wide. Then I put a handful of food inside, way at the back, so he could step in without ever having to let go of that toy. I went back to my spot on the concrete and sat down again. "I get it, little guy," I remember saying out loud. "If I take your rabbit, I take your trust, so I'm not touching it. You bring it with you, or we don't go." He watched the crate like it might bite. He circled it, slow and stiff-legged, always keeping the rabbit between us like a fuzzy gray shield. He'd lean in just enough to smell the food, then pull back, eyes cutting to me, checking if I was going to make a move. It felt like we were having a conversation without words. Every time I stayed still, he got a little braver. Every time the wind rattled a loose piece of metal on the dumpster, he flinched and pressed his teeth deeper into the rabbit's ear. But the smell of that food and the open door kept pulling at him. Finally, he made his choice. He took a breath, lowered his head, and stepped into the crate, dragging the stuffed rabbit along the plastic floor with him. Once he was all the way inside, he turned in a clumsy circle and lay down, curling his body around the toy so tightly it almost disappeared. I moved in then, slow as I could, and closed the door with 2 fingers on the metal latch. I never touched the rabbit, didn't even brush it. When I lifted the crate and started walking toward the truck, he went completely silent. The only thing I could see were his eyes, shining from the shadows just above that torn gray ear, watching me like he was trying to decide if coming with me was the first safe thing he'd ever done, or the biggest mistake of his small life. The drive back to the shelter didn't take long, but for him it must have felt like another planet. Fluorescent lights, metal doors, the smell of cleaner instead of old trash and hot asphalt. I carried the crate inside and set it down while the staff gathered around to see the tiny Labrador puppy with the rabbit. They meant well. They always do. One of them leaned in, wrinkled her nose a little, and said, "We should get that filthy thing out of there and wash it." Her hand went straight for the gray ear. He exploded in silence. No barking, no snapping. Just this wild, panicked scramble backward as he crushed the rabbit against his chest. A high, broken whine came out of him, then a tiny growl that didn't sound tough at all, just desperate. He wedged himself into the back corner of the crate, eyes huge, toy smashed under his chin like it was the only solid thing left. "Stop," I heard myself say, sharper than I meant to. "For you, it's a dirty rag," I told them, softer this time. For him, it's the only familiar thing he has. Hands froze in the air, then pulled back. I asked them to give us time. We could wash the rabbit later, when his world wasn't hanging by that single thread. Right now, the safest thing we could do for this puppy was to leave his one anchor exactly where it was. That evening, as I walked past his kennel before going home, I saw him asleep. Not on the clean blanket we'd laid down, not curled into the corner. He was stretched right on top of that rabbit, little body draped over it, as if the only way to be sure no one would take it in the night was to become its blanket himself. The next morning, I came in earlier than usual. The halls were still quiet, lights half on, that in-between time before the day really starts. When I reached his kennel, he was awake, those pale eyes watching the doorway like he'd been waiting for something to happen. He wasn't shaking the way he had the day before. But that rabbit was still in his mouth, clamped between those tiny teeth, like his jaw was the only safe deposit box he trusted. Every breath he took made the toy move just a little, but he never let it slip. On the front of his kennel, there was an empty card waiting for a name. Just Labrador puppy, male, approximately 6 weeks, written in quick marker. I stood there looking at his light coat, that soft pink nose, and the little worn patch on the rabbit's belly where the stuffing felt thinner. "Let's call you Patch," I said. It seemed to fit both of them. As the shelter woke up, people started filtering through. Volunteers, visitors, folks looking to adopt. I noticed the same pattern over and over again. They'd see a tiny pup with a stuffed toy, and their faces would soften. Then their hands would reach out. If a hand went straight for the rabbit, Patch would shut down. He'd back up just an inch or two, clamp his jaw tighter, and his eyes would go flat, like he was disappearing behind his own face. If someone sat down instead, spoke to him, let him sniff their fingers, and didn't touch the toy at all, he'd edge closer. Sometimes he'd even set his paw down right next to the rabbit, like an invitation that still respected his rules. By the afternoon, one family had spent a lot of time in front of his kennel. They seemed nice enough, talking about backyards and walks and kids. But when their youngest reached between the bars and tugged at the rabbit's ear, Patch pulled away and hid behind it like a wall. On their way out, I heard one of them say, "He's too attached to that dirty thing. I don't want a dog that needy." For the first time in a long time, I felt something hot rise up in my chest. It surprised me how quickly I went from tired to angry, standing there watching a puppy be judged for the one thing that had kept his little world from falling apart. It didn't take long for someone at the shelter to say, "We should post him. People love puppies with toys," so they snapped a picture of him in his kennel, this tiny Dudley Labrador puppy with huge worried eyes and that gray rabbit stuffed in his mouth like a life preserver. They put it up on our page with a simple caption, "Patch refuses to let go of his rabbit." That was it. No long story, no explanation, just one photo of a baby holding on to the only thing he trusted. The comments started almost right away. A lot of people melted over him. Heart emojis, "I would die for him," "Look at that face," all the usual things you see under cute dog posts. Some meant well, but missed the point, typing things like, "You need to teach him to share his toys," or "Take it away so he learns he doesn't need it." And then they started coming in person. "Is he still here? Can we see the little rabbit puppy?" They'd stand by his kennel, coo over how small he was, talk about his pink nose and pale fur. Almost every time, the first hand that went in went not to his cheek, not to his chest, but right for the rabbit. "Just want to see it," they'd say. Patch gave the same answer every time. He'd step back, just out of reach, jaw locking down, eyes slipping past them like he'd turned the volume off on the whole world. He wasn't mean. He wasn't even loud. He just disappeared behind that toy and waited for their hands to go away. I found myself repeating the same thing over and over. "This isn't about a toy," I told people. "He lost something, maybe a lot of things, before we found him. Right now he measures safety by how you treat that rabbit." Some nodded like they understood. Some smiled politely and went to look at another dog. One afternoon, after another family walked off saying, "He's cute, but that attachment is a red flag," one of the staff pulled me aside. "If we just take the rabbit out for a while," she said, keeping her voice low, "he might look better to adopters." And I remember feeling my stomach drop at the thought of Patch sitting in that kennel, on display with his one piece of the world suddenly gone. The day before our big adoption event, my worst fear for him showed up wearing good intentions. I walked in mid-morning, and Patch's kennel looked wrong before I even reached it. The rabbit was gone. No gray ears, no little stitched-on smile, just a bare blanket and a tiny Dudley Labrador puppy pacing in tight circles. He was whining under his breath, nose scraping every inch of the floor like he was sure it had to be there somewhere. His food bowl was full and untouched. Every few steps he'd stop, stare at the empty spot where the rabbit usually lay, then look up at the bars like he was asking who took his whole world while he was asleep. I felt my stomach turn over. One of my coworkers popped her head around the corner, holding a bright new rubber ball. "I grabbed his gross toy to wash it," she said. "Figured we'd give him something cleaner for the event." I'm not proud of how fast my voice came out. He doesn't need a cleaner toy, I snapped. He needs his toy. I didn't wait for an answer. I went straight to the little laundry room we use in the back. There in a plastic tub was the rabbit, soaked and twisted in soapy water, one ear floating like it was drowning. I reached in and pulled it out, heavy and dripping, and for a second I just stood there staring at it, angry at all of us. We wanted him to look better in pictures, and instead we'd given him one more reason to believe that anything he loved could disappear. I carried that soggy rabbit back to his kennel like it was made of glass. The second Patch saw it, he froze. Then he rushed forward and took it from my hand with this soft, desperate grab, like he was afraid it might slip away again. He dropped it between his paws and curled around it, finally going quiet, his little body pressing against my fingers through the bars. I knelt down so we were eye to eye and scratched gently behind his ear. "Listen, Patch," I told him. "On adoption day, when someone comes for you, this rabbit is staying with you, no matter what anyone says." I remember leaning in closer and whispering, "Your little friend goes wherever you go. I promise." Adoption days all start the same way. Colorful signs, folding pens, nervous dogs, excited people. Patch had his own little enclosure near my chair, a soft blanket under his paws and that same worn rabbit in his mouth like a kid clutching a security blanket on the first day of school. Families came in waves. They'd lean over the rail and ask the same questions I've heard 100 times. Can we hold him? Can we see his teeth? Can I take his toy just for a second? They meant well, most of them. They just saw a cute Labrador puppy with a stuffed bunny and thought everything about him should be easy. Each time a hand went toward the rabbit, Patch gave his polite little answer. He'd shuffle back just out of reach, sit down closer to my leg, and suddenly become very interested in a speck on the floor or a sound across the room. He never snapped. He never growled. He just turned the world off and waited for the temptation to pass. Some families looked perfect on paper. Nice smiles, calm voices, talk about fenced yards and good schools. But after a minute or two of being ignored in favor of the bunny, they'd straighten up and shake their heads. "He's kind of nervous," one dad said. "Too attached to that thing," another mom added. I don't want a dog that's going to cling to stuff like that. By late afternoon, the music had gotten tinny and the decorations looked tired. Other puppies had adopted stickers slapped on their signs. Patch still sat by my feet, rabbit in his mouth, eyes following every family that walked past and then away again. Behind us, I could hear the staff whispering. Maybe he needed more time. Maybe a long-term foster would be better. Maybe people wouldn't understand a puppy who couldn't seem to let go of an old gray toy. I just sat there with my hand resting near his back, feeling him breathe around that rabbit, and wondered if anyone would ever look past the toy long enough to see the little heart that was holding on to it so hard. It took a couple of weeks for his body to catch up with his spirit. By then, Patch was eating better, filling out a little, walking steadier on his paws. The rabbit was still in his mouth most of the time, of course, like the handle on his whole life. One afternoon, the lobby bell rang, and a boy around 8 walked in, holding his mom's hand. In his other hand, he clutched a stuffed dog that had seen better years. Fur worn thin, one eye a little crooked, seems a bit tired. They didn't come straight to Patch. They walked slowly past every kennel, the boy quiet, just watching. When they reached our corner, he didn't lean over the rail or stick his fingers through the bars. He just sat down on the floor a few feet away, folding his legs under him, his old toy resting on his knees. He looked up at me and asked, "Can I just sit by the little puppy who loves his rabbit?" I said yes, and stepped back. Patch watched him, watched the stuffed dog, then glanced at his own rabbit like he was comparing notes. The boy spoke softly, not really to me. He told Patch that his toy dog had been with him through a move, through nights when he was scared, through times he wanted to cry but didn't. "That's why I still carry him," he said, "so I don't fall apart." He never reached for the rabbit. Instead, he placed his own toy gently on the floor between them and scooted back a little, leaving space. Patch hesitated, then made a choice none of us had ever seen from him. He stepped forward, opened his mouth, and set his rabbit down right next to the boy's toy. Then he lowered himself so that both stuffed animals ended up tucked together under his chin. The whole room went quiet. For the first time since we'd found him, Patch hadn't just defended his little world, he'd shared it. Those next days all started to blur together. Same pen, same rabbit, same questions from different mouths. Patch holding on, people letting go. It felt like we were stuck in a loop, waiting for someone who actually spoke his language. After that moment on the floor with the two toys, the boy's mom pulled me aside. She told me quietly they weren't even sure they should walk into a shelter yet. Their last dog had died not so long ago, and they were afraid her son wasn't ready to open that door again. But then he saw the picture of the puppy with the rabbit, she said, and he just wouldn't stop talking about him. She watched her kid sit there, not touching Patch's rabbit, just offering his own worn-out stuffed dog like a small peace treaty. I've never seen him respect a boundary like that, she admitted, half smiling. He knows what it feels like to hang on to one thing so you don't fall apart. I think that's why he came. They didn't make a big speech about it. They just turned to me and asked, simple and serious, if it's okay with you, can we adopt him? Patch was still lying with both toys tucked under his chin, eyes drifting between my face and theirs like he was waiting to hear the verdict. When we went to the office to do the paperwork, I filled in the lines I've filled 100 times. Name, Patch. Notes, must go home with rabbit. At the bottom of the form, I checked the little box that says adopted, and for once, it felt like more than a checkbox. It felt like closing the cover on one book and cracking open another. Out in the parking lot, the boy buckled himself in beside Patch, who now had his rabbit back in his mouth. The stuffed dog lay next to him on the seat, like they were already a team. Before they shut the car door, the boy looked up at me and said, "We can wash them together, but not on the same day. One of them should always smell like home." As they pulled away, I caught a last glimpse through the rear window. Patch's small head, ears perked, two toy shapes side by side in his lap. For the first time since I'd found him behind that supermarket, he wasn't guarding his whole world from being taken. He was taking it with him. Right now, I'm sitting in front of a Brave Paws microphone, and Patch isn't that scared little skeleton behind a supermarket anymore. He's out there somewhere in Nashville, sleeping on a kid's bed, with a washed but never too fresh rabbit on one side and a tired stuffed dog on the other. Every now and then, they bring him by the shelter and he trots in like he owns the place, rabbit still in his mouth, just checking that we're all doing our jobs. When I think back to that first day, I know this for sure. That puppy was never just guarding a toy. He was guarding his memories, his fear, his tiny, fragile piece of safety in a world that had already taken too much. This little guy's journey from abandonment to rehabilitation shows how important nonprofit rescue groups really are. Without people willing to stop, to listen, to respect one dirty stuffed rabbit, Patch could have disappeared into the dust behind that supermarket and none of us would ever have known. And here's the other part I want you to remember. Caring for a rescued puppy is more than love. It's responsibility. It's pet care. It's sitting on the floor instead of reaching through the bars. It's letting a dog keep the one silly, ugly, worn-out thing that makes them feel safe. So please don't laugh at old blankets, chewed balls, or toys that should have been thrown out years ago. Sometimes that's the only thread holding a brave little heart together. If Patch's story touched you, please like this video, leave a comment, and share it with someone who loves dogs. Every bit of support helps us rescue more pups like him and the humans who need them. And if you have your own story about a dog who stayed, who protected you, or who never betrayed you, send it to the email in the Brave Paws channel description. Maybe the next story we tell here will be yours.